Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I decided to bring this video where I'm going to be showing you guys how to implement a simple authentication system using React, Node Express, and the Stytch library made for allowing passwordless authentication by using something like an email system. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'm gonna show you guys a demo over here of the application we're gonna be building. Basically, it's just simulating how authentication works and actually making it work inside of an application. You can see we have this little button over here, which when I click on it, it will basically make an API request to an API we created in this video. And if the user is authenticated, it should say it should learn a message saying it worked. If it is not authenticated, it should say user not auth, which obviously right now it's not authenticated, but let's try to authenticate this user. Well, we'll do this by going to the login page over here, and we can put our email to sign up the user. So I'll just say pedro@pedrotech.co, which is my business email. Don't send emails to this this email if you don't want to do business. But I'm going to click on login, and right over here, the user which is trying to log in or sign up should receive an email from Stytch with their login, with a little button saying, click the button below to log in, your link will expire in 1 hour. When we click on this button, we should now be automatically authenticated. We didn't have to put passwords, nothing. It is pretty simple and easy. And how do we test to see if we're authenticated? Well, if I click on this test API auth button, it should say it worked. Now, why does it work? Because we now have a token inside of our application, which actually authenticates the user. If we remove this token, you should see that the user shouldn't be authenticated, so it will say user not authenticated. Now, this is how authentication usually works, but it is super easy to do it with Stytch, so I decided to bring this video where we're going to be building this full stack application, and yeah, that's basically it. The whole code for this project will be in the description. If you want to check out while you're watching the video, just go over there to the GitHub repository and just download the code to your computer. And yeah, that's basically it. So let's get into the video. Okay everyone, so let's get into the tutorial. I just opened up over here a new application on VS Code. It's completely empty, there's absolutely nothing. I just opened a folder so we can just start it right over here. So the first thing we want to do is create two folders inside of our application, one called client and one called server, because we're going to be dividing our app into, it's going to be a full stack app, so we're going to divide it into client and folder. So we're going to open up over here the terminal, and you can see that it's opened up on the folder itself and not inside of any of these folders. So the React part of the application will exist in the client folder, whilst the authentication, the server side of the application will exist in the server folder. So in order to make it, to create both of those sides, we're going to first go to the client and run the command yarn create React app, right? If you're using NPM, you can use npx create React app. But I'm not, I'm using yarn, so I'm just going to run it like this. And it will generate a React application inside of the client folder. So we're going to open up another terminal while that's happening, and we're going to move to the server folder. Inside of here, we're going to generate our server, which we can easily generate. It's going to be using Express and NodeJS. And we generate a simple Express server by first generating the package.json file by running yarn init, or if you're using npm, it is npm init. And I'm gonna press enter. It will ask me a bunch of questions. I'll just press enter to all of them. And you can see that now it generated a package.json file inside of our server. Now, we also want to install some packages for the server, and they're gonna be fundamental for our project to work. So the first package that I want to install is the Express package, so the Express library. And we also want to install Cores, which is a library which allows us to connect our frontend to our backend without any connection errors. And we're also going to install Node1 so that we can develop our backend and keep restarting the server every time there's some changes to our code. And we're also going to install the Stytch library like this. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to be using Stytch mainly to handle all of the authentication and like user creation by using the email system. It handles all of that on your own. So that's the package that we're going to be using. I'm going to press enter and it will start installing everything. And we can check to see that our front end is already finished, right? It generated a React application just by running the command, which means it seems to be working. Now we need to install 2 packages in React because we're going to be using both of them throughout our application. And the first package we want to install is Axios. And Axios, I've made videos on it in the past. It basically allows us to make API requests in a simpler way, in my opinion. It's simpler than just using the fetch API, which exists in JavaScript. So for that reason, I like using it in my videos because it's very simple and easy to understand. We're also going to be using Universal Cookie, which if you saw in the beginning, our token is actually stored in a cookie because it's a very secure way to store stuff in your front end. So a very simple way to handle cookies is by using this library called Universal Cookie. It is really cool. I love using it. So we're going to install that right now. So you can see both our front end and our back end seems to be completely set up, which is great. So let's start actually creating some files and working on our project. So in our backend over here, we're going to create a file, which is going to be the entry point of our server. We call it index.js because that's the default name that we can put. And we're going to be setting up our whole server inside of here. Since the main point of the video is just explaining how to create this system using Stytch and connecting it to our front end, I don't want to overcomplicate this, so I'll keep it as simple as possible and focus purely on functionality. So we can start setting up our server by first running const express equals to require express. So we're going to install or import the express library. And then we're going to create a variable called app and set it equal to express like this. We're also going to import the cores library, which, like I mentioned, is just a little requirement that you need to have when you're connecting your Node.js backend to a React app, or else you will be dealing with issues, right? Some connection issues. And finally, we're gonna import the Stytch library by saying require Stytch. Now I'm gonna save this, and I'm gonna apply 2 middlewares that will be very important for us. The first one is the cores middleware. So this is all you have to do for cores in order to prevent any issues. So we're not going to be using the cores library anymore. You just have to do this every time you create an application like this. And also, we're going to apply the express.json middleware, which will basically parse all of the JSON objects that we receive every time we have a request. So it will allow us to send data from the front end to the back end, which is kind of what we need because when the user signs up with their email in the front end, we need to get it in our back end. So we're going to send that email inside of a JSON object, and we can only parse the JSON object by applying this middleware. And our project can be finalized by just saying app.listen down here, like this, passing in a port. I'm going to use the port 3001 because we're going to run React on the port 3000, and I'll just generate a function that will say something like server is running, like this, something simple. And I'm going to save this. Now, in order to run this server, because it's currently not running, we need to, first of all, create the script that will enable NodeMon. So like I mentioned, NodeMon will just make it so that whenever we make any changes to our code and we save the file, it will automatically restart the server so that we can see the changes in our server. So to make NodeMon work, I'll just set up a start script and make it, whenever we run yarn start, it will just run the command NodeMon index.js, and it should be working now. I'll just say yarn start, and you can see our server is running, which is great. But there isn't a lot in our server yet. We just made a lot of the boilerplate stuff, setting up a lot of our initial code, but we haven't actually created any endpoints, and it's not very clear of what we're doing right now. However, I feel like if we just leave our server like this for now and start working on the front end, you guys can get a better idea of what exactly we're going to do, because you'll get a visual representation of the code running. So I'm going to close this over here. I'm going to open up our client folder on the left. And you can see that, first of all, we have a bunch of folders over here. I'm going to delete some of them because we're just not going to use them. I'm going to delete the tests, the logo, the index.css, and the app.test.js. So I'm going to delete all 4 of those files. I always do this in the beginning of a tutorial. And I'm also going to delete the index.css file over here. And everything that exists inside of our app file over here. So I'm going to delete the logo import and all of this over here. Now, what I want to do is I want to point out that we're actually going to have multiple pages in our application. So we actually need to install one more package in the front end. The package is the React Router DOM package. React Router DOM. If you're interested in getting a very in-depth tutorial on React Router DOM, I do have a full-on tutorial on this. It just allows you to create multiple routes inside of your app, which is what we're going to be doing. We're also going to run our front end so that we can actually start seeing it over here. Obviously right now it's just an empty page, but we're going to be adding more stuff right now. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set up our routes inside of our application. So I'm going to import over here at the top from React Router DOM, like this. I'll say React Router DOM. And what I want to import is, first of all, I want to import browser router. And I'm going to call it router. Then I want to import routes and the route component. Now, each of them have their own purposes. I won't explain in depth what each of them do because I already have a video on this. But in order to set up our routes, I'll just first set up router over here and then explain where our routes will be defined by using the routes component. And finally, we're going to define 3 routes inside of our project. Now, the 3 routes will be the home page, the one that you see saying that if you're not authenticated, click on this link. And then we're going to have the login page, which is meant for people who are not logged in yet. And finally, we're going to have another page which you didn't see in the demo because it's kind of hidden. It's not meant to be seen. It's meant to be redirected to and then handle all the logic and redirect back to the home page. Now, I'll explain better as we go on, but this is basically the point of it. So I'm going to set up over here a path to the first route, and it is the home path. So I'm just going to put the empty slash and give an element which will be the home component. So we don't have the home component right now. We do have to create it. So I'm going to create a folder over here in the source folder, which is going to be called pages. This will handle or will contain all of the different page components that we're going to have in our application. So the first one will be the home.js. The second one will be the login.js. And like I mentioned, we're going to have a third one, which is going to be the auth.js. And I'm going to create each of these components. I have a snippet installed inside of my code. It is this one over here, ES7 React Redux React Native snippets. If I were you, I would install it because it generates, for example, just components automatically by just writing RFCE. And I can generate this React component very easily. So I'm going to save this, come to the login, do the same thing, then go to the auth, do the same thing, and now we have the 3 pages inside of our project. So what we have to do now is we just have to import all 3 of those pages. The first one is the home. When I press this, it will automatically import it, as you can see over here. And I can just say that when you go to the route with the empty slash, it should display the home component. Then I'm going to copy and paste this for the other 2 pages. For the login component, I'll just say this, it will automatically import. And for the auth, I'll say the same thing and it will automatically import. That means that for now, if we go to the home page, it will say home. If we go to the login page, it will say login. Or actually it won't say anything. Oh, because we just we forgot to set the routes. So we'll set the login component to be rendered on the login route and the auth on the auth route, like this. And you can see that now on the login, it says login, and on the auth, it says auth. And on any other page, we'll just say the home over here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for now, just so you can see it. But we have set up our routes, which is amazing, which means that we can now start setting up the code for our login page. So we'll go to the login component over here. And we kind of wanted to set up a little form, right, with the email part, which I showed in the beginning. So it's going to be pretty simple. Like I mentioned, my focus in this tutorial is just functionality. So I'll just be putting, for like all the styling stuff, which is not that much, I'll just be adding some like class names to the elements, and I'll paste the CSS on my own time, but I'll also show you guys the CSS so you guys can just get an idea, but I'm not going to explain and show myself writing CSS because it's not the point of the video. But the first thing we want to do is just give a class name. I'm going to call this form container. Then I'm going to create another div, which is going to be a div containing an h1 tag saying sign up. Just a tag for the for the like the top of the form. Then I want to create the div for the body. So I'm gonna say body over here, and I'm just gonna close this. And basically inside of the body of our form, we're just gonna have a little tag over here saying enter your email to sign up, something simple like this. And we're also going to have our input and our button. So I'll say input and I'll say button. Then our button will just say authenticate or login. Let's just put login actually. And over here for our input, it's actually going to be of type email because we're going to submit an email, and there is a type email in HTML. Then we're going to put a placeholder, which will just say something like, I don't know, just set it equal to email like this and 3 dots. And then for our button, it should be fine, right? It should be fine. We just have everything inside our form working perfectly. Now we can just check to see how our form looks. If we go to the login page like this, and it looks pretty okay, right? Obviously the CSS is not here. I'm gonna add it at the end, but at least it asks us for our email, and there's a login button, which is perfect. So what we want to do now is we want to start understanding how Stytch works. So if you want to create an account on Stytch, you need to come to stytch.com over here, and you basically create an account with them. I already have an account, so I won't be creating a new account. But when you create your account, it's pretty simple. It's free to create your account, so I would just do it that way. You would go to your dashboard right over here. You would create your first project. And as you can see, when you have your first project, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with the Stytch API. One of the main things they do is they allow us to create this passwordless authentication system, which can integrate many different ways to authenticate. The one we chose in this video is the email authentication. And they handle everything for you. They even manage users inside of your application. And in order to make this work, we need to first come over here into our project, right? We set up everything. And in order to make this work, you need to first create your account, like I mentioned, and just enter into this dashboard over here. Then we're going to come over here to our backend, which is the index.js over here. And we need to connect to our Stytch account. And the way we do this is by coming over here to API keys, and you can see that it will give you an API key. Like it gives you first a project ID, which you need, and it will also give you a secret, which you also need. I have both of them, and you get both of those informations, keep track of them, and then you just come to your backend, and we are just going to create a variable called client, like this, set it equal to new Stytch.client, and it will pass an object over here requiring 2 different pieces of information. First, it will require a project ID, like I mentioned, and also it will require a secret. Now, finally, it will also require an env property, which is just letting you know what kind of environment you're running. In our case, we're running a development, like a test environment. So you can just define that by saying stitch.envs.test. If you want to deploy this, you could then say live, and it should work perfectly. So I'm just going to say test, and we're going to copy and paste the project and the secret inside over here. So I'm going to copy the project ID, paste it over here as a string, and the secret, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but the secret, you shouldn't display it to anyone else. I'm just showing you because I'm just going to delete this right after the video, but I'm just going to save this, and we now have a connection to our Stytch application. So what exactly do we want to do with this client variable over here? Well, the way this is going to work is the user in the front end will enter their email, click on login or sign up, and we're going to get this email through our backend through an API request. Now, we need to set up our API request to make this work. So I'm going to say app.post, and this will be an API request for the login route. So we're just trying to log in. So I'm just going to put login as the route for which we're going to make this request. Then we want to create a function inside of here, which will be the function that runs when we make this API request. And it will require a rec and a res, so a request and a response objects. And we're also going to make this asynchronous because we need to have our app running asynchronous for to work. So inside of here, what we're going to do is we're just going to save this, and we need to first get our email, right? And we can get the email by saying const email equal to rack.body.email, because we're going to pass the email from the front end to the back end through the body object, right? Then what I want to do is we need to create this thing called params. It's just a variable which is going to hold the information for the email that we're going to send, right? So with Stytch, it's going to require in order to actually send an email to the user to then authenticate the user, we have to use this function where we create this variable called response, set it equal to await, and call the client dot magic links dot email dot login or create. Now this is a lot, but basically what happens is we're using the magic links service from Stytch. It will basically give us a link in our email, which we can click on it and it will authenticate the user, right? It will give us a token for the user who's trying to log in or sign up. So what this function does is it will basically, when you receive an email, it will either log in a user or create a new user if the user is not in the Stytch database, right? In the database of users that we are creating in our project. So what we need to pass inside of this function is this variable called params. Now there's a couple properties that we need to pass inside of this params. The first one is just the email of the user, which we already got from the front end over here. And when you have an object where the property, the key is the same name as the value, you can just do this in JavaScript. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Then we need a login magic link URL. So it's a URL for the login, and the sign up magic link URL, which is almost the same thing. I'll explain what each of them does. So basically, when you log in, you want to be redirected, right? So basically, when the user clicks on the email button saying to authenticate, they need to be redirected back to your own website, right? So basically, the links we put over here are the URL to the page in our website which we want the user to be redirected to. So in our case, when the user logs in, we want them to be redirected to the auth page that we created. Now, obviously, we haven't put anything yet, but this is basically where we want to do, because when the user goes to the auth, we're going to handle everything related to their token and how we're going to handle that, right? So basically what we're going to write here is just the URL for the front end, which is running on localhost 3000, not 3001 or 3002, just 3000, /auth. Because it means that when the user is authenticated, it will bring them back to this page. Now we're going to put the same thing for both of them because we want to go to the same page no matter what, if they're signed up or login. If you want to do something different for sign up and login, you can just change these links and it should be fine. But in order for these links to work, so that we successfully redirect the user to our web page when they click on their email link, we need to come to Stytch over here and click on the redirect URLs part of the configuration tab. This link over here will allow us to create a redirect URL, which will be allowed by Stytch. If we don't do this, Stytch won't just redirect you to wherever they want, right? We need to define which page we are allowed for the user to be redirected towards. So we're just going to put over here http/localhost, and we're going to put the 3000/auth, right? So we're just saying that we are allowed to redirect to this page over here. So we're gonna save this. We'll put a type all and save this, and you can see all of the options just appeared. So we just set up our we're now allowed the user to actually try to log in, and they will receive an email. We can actually test to see if this is working. You can just send back after the request is done. I'll just use the JSON function. Actually, we'll just send back whatever response we get from this thing over here, but it doesn't really matter. This API endpoint, its main purpose is to make the backend get the email and send the email to the user. So let's test to see if this is working. We'll come over here to our front end in the login page, and we'll actually need to create a function that will be called when the user clicks on the login button, because this login button will have an on click, and we'll call a function called login, and we'll create this function right over here. So const login is just a function that will basically make the request for the user to log in. Now we do need to keep track of the user email, the email that the user is typing on this input. So I'm going to say const, and I'm going to create a state in React, which will keep track of whatever the user is typing on the input. So we're going to say email, set email, and over here, we're just going to give an on change to the input, which will basically update the state whenever the user types anything on the input, so that it keeps track of the value of the input. So I'm going to say set email is equal to, so you guys can see better, it's equal to e.target.value, like this. I'm going to save this so you guys can have a better view of this, but basically we're just setting the state equal to the input. So now that we keep track of the email, we'll come down here, and we want to make the API request to our own backend. So to do that, we're going to finally be using Axios in our application. So I'm going to say import Axios from Axios, and we're just going to say Axios.post because it is a post request. Remember, we created a post request over here, and we'll just put the URL for this request. And the URL is just the link to our backend. So localhost 3001. Actually, I changed mine to 3002 because on my computer I already have something running on 3001, but most likely you guys don't. So I'd recommend keeping on 2001. But for me, it will have to be 3002. And we put the /login because we want to make a request to the login endpoint. So I'm going to save this, and I'll just pass over here the body to this request, which should be an object with the email property, right? So to do that, I'll just create this object and pass the email inside of here. Then save this. I'll say that after the request is done, we can just maybe console log some message saying it worked, right? So saying it works perfectly. Now we can test this out inside of our application, which is amazing. So I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna try to log in using my email. So one thing I want to mention is Stytch allows you to, in the beginning, have this sign up property for a bunch of users, but you need to first register with their website, put their your credit card information inside of the website. It is very secure. The reason why they do this is because they don't want random people overloading their API and just sending a bunch of emails without actually being a user that is going to use their platform. Again, it is free until a certain point. So for testing and creating small projects, it is completely fine. So if you don't put your credit card information, it will only allow you to test sending emails to the email that you use to register your Stytch account, which should be fine. I don't see a lot of problem with that. If you want to use this for like a enterprise level project, then yeah, you will have to pay, but you have to pay for any other product as well. In this case, I'm just letting you know this because it will only work for your own email. The email I used to register was my pedro@pedrotech.co email, and we can now use this to test out to see if it's going to work. I'm going to open the network tab because I want to see how the API request will run inside of our project. So I'm going to click on login, and you can see it completely failed. We can check to see why it failed. I'm going to zoom in a little bit over here, but it seems like it received the email correctly, but there might have been an error inside of the actual backend code. So let's test to see if it works, and it doesn't. It completely fails. I don't know why. Let's actually take a look. And yeah, I just realized I accidentally wrote localhost instead of localhost. So that definitely causes an issue. I'm going to save this and let's test it out again. I'm going to refresh the page, write the same email over here. And when I run this, it should make the correct API request, as you can see. And I should get back the information about the user that is given through Stytch, right? But most importantly, we should receive an email from Stytch inside of the email pedro@pedrotech.co. I actually just opened my email over here and I'm filtering only for emails from Stytch. So I'm going to refresh my page and you can see that I just got this email over here, which is saying your login request for my project, which is a project I created. So I click on this link over here. You can see that we get to this page over here. We're correctly redirected to the auth page. And on the auth page, we have this little token right over here at the top. So this token over here is a one-time token that you use to get to authenticate the user with Stytch. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to try to get the token that appears over here on the URL, send it back to the backend, then call a Stytch function that will authenticate the user. That function is able to create a session that can last however long we want it to last. And we'll get back the data related to the session and then send it back and store it into the cookies. So then with the session token that we get, we can actually use to validate every single request and authenticate the requests as we want to. So what we need right now is to be able to grab this over here inside of our code and do something with it, send it back to our backend, right? So the way we're going to do this is we're currently in the auth page, right? But we're not doing anything with the token. We're not even having access to it. So in order to actually have access to this, we have to understand what exactly is this. So when you're working with routes, there's a couple ways you can get data from a specific route inside of your application. One way is by using query params. So a query param is something like this. When you see on a URL, a little question mark, a name for a variable, then an equal sign and a value for it. So it's almost like a way to pass variables and their values inside of the URL. So with React.DOM, we can get the value of the token variable by just coming over here, importing like this, import from React.DOM, and what we want to import is a hook called the use search params. Now this hook over here is very important. We can come over here to our application, say const search params, then set it equal to use search params, and now we can use this variable over here to have access to the value of the token. Now, when do we need, what is the point of this auth component, right? The whole point of it is to be an intermediate state where we get the token from the redirect and then send the token back to the backend and then redirect us back to some sort of other page inside of our application. So we need to be able to navigate immediately when we come to this component. Whenever we render this component, we run all of this logic of making the API request and sending back the token, and then immediately redirect to another page. So the way we redirect in React.DOM is there is a component called the navigate component that we can just use like this by calling the navigate component, and this component just takes in two different arguments to it. So the first prop that we can pass is where do we want to redirect towards? So I'm just going to put an empty slash, meaning that we're going to the home page. And the second one is the replace one, which basically just clears up your history so that like the history of your location. It is important that you put this, so we need to put those two props. But also, in order to run the logic of making the API request and sending it back to the backend, we need to do that immediately when the component is rendered. So we're going to use a use effect over here, which is just a function that will be called immediately when the page or the component renders. And in the use effect, what we want to do is we want to make the Axios post request like this. And also, when you import the Axios, don't forget to import it like this, or else it will give you bugs. but we're gonna say axios.post. Then we're gonna put over here the HTTP and 2 slashes, then localhost 3002. And if I want to get this token, all I have to say is search params.get. Then I put the value over here, which is the value of the variable in our URL. It should be, why is it not over here? Oh, I know why. It's because we put the navigate and save the file, so it automatically redirected us back to the home page. So for a second, let's just remove this thing over here and just return like a, I don't know, like just saying hello world, like just an empty tag so that we can actually look at the token and not be redirected immediately. But you can see the token is this one over here, right? So this is what we put on the argument over here so that we can get back whatever is after the equal sign, which is the token that we're going to send back to the backend. So what we do now is we save this. Then we want to be able to have this API request because we haven't created it yet. So let's start by going to our backend and actually making this API request inside of our API. So I'm going to do it right over here, right below the login one, by saying app.post and passing the /auth route, right? Then we get a rec and res like we did with the login one. And what we want is we're going to grab the token like you see over here from the body. So let's do that right now. We'll just say const token is equal to rec.body.token, right? Now, what do we do with this token? Well, like I mentioned, this is a one-time token, right? The one that we get from the URL from the redirect. It's a one-time token that we're going to be using by calling a function on Stytch to authenticate that one-time token, which will give us back another session token, which will last however minutes we want the session for the user to last, right? So then we'll get that session token, send back to the front end, and store that on the cookie. So there is a function on Stytch which is called the client.magiclinks.authenticate function, which when we pass the token over here, it will authenticate and give us back the session token. So to give us back the session token, we need to say const session token like this equal to await. Because it will return a promise back. So we need to make this asynchronous like this. And then what we want to do is we want to, first of all, console log the session token so we can see it, right? Because we want to be able to see what we get back from this. And then we can just send back the session token so that we can have access to it in the front end. So we'll say res.json session token like this, and we should get it back. Now what we want is we want to be able to handle errors inside of this. Now you know that if you're working with asynchronous programming, there's two ways to do it, right? You can use the async await method like this, or you can use the classic promise one, right, where you .then and .catch. Now to handle errors while using the async await method, you need to write a try catch statement. So we say that we want to try to authenticate our token. If there's any issues with the Stytch library, so for example, either the service is not working or the user actually isn't authenticated, then we'll handle it by going through the catch statement, which will have the error, right? And for the error, we'll just send back the error like this, and it should be fine. Now that we have this, we can actually test to see if it works, right? But one thing I want to point out is we can actually specify on Stytch how long we want the session for the user authentication to last, right? So for example, I could put over here this thing called the session duration, like this, minutes. It basically, like the name explains, it's the duration of the session in minutes. So what we can put is something like 30, which means that the user will be authenticated for like 30 minutes, right? So this should be fine. We can actually test this out to see if it works. So we're gonna come to our auth over here, and after we make the post request, we're gonna say .then, grab the response, and for now, let's just console log the response, right? The response obviously should be the session token if everything worked. We'll say response.data, because if everything works and the user is authenticated, we're sending back the session token variable that we created, right? When we say res.json, we're sending it back to our frontend, and we should get it right over here. Now, let's put back the navigate that we added so that we don't have to get stuck on this page, and we actually get redirected back. And if we look at our network over here, let's come over here to this, click on the login again, we get redirected back. Now let's look at our console, and you can see that we have an object containing an error message. But one thing I think might be happening is I think that the token that we had opened up from the previous email was expired. So we can actually just try this again, the whole process again, and see if it works. So I'm going to put my email over here, PedroTech.co, then click on login and go to our email over here, refresh our page. We get the email request, and then click on login. And now if everything is right, we should see on our console log an object which works, as you can see. This is the session token that we get back, meaning that for 30 minutes, we're going to be logged into this session. Now, this means that we have access to the session token in our frontend, right? Which is amazing. We get it right over here. Now, we're just console logging the data, but we want to do more than that. We want to be able to store that value in our cookie so that every time we make an API request, we send that to our API and check to see if it is the correct session token. Now, to set a cookie, we're going to be using the universal cookie library, which is very famous in React. It is very easy to use. It makes cookies be like super simple. I'm going to show you guys how to import it, but basically to import it, we just say import cookies like this, then say from universal cookie. Then we just come down over here and just say const cookie equal to new cookies, right? It's a class that we just satiate a new version of it, and we put it into the variable cookie. Now we can access all of its methods, and the most important one that we want to access is the cookie dot set, which sets a cookie onto a browser. And we can set a cookie by first passing the key for it, which will be session token, which we can get by saying response.data, right? Which is the data that we get back from our API request. Now that we have stored it in our token, right, in our cookie, let's test to see if it works. I'm going to come over here again, click on login, check to see if the console log is correct. It actually didn't console log anything. I'll just run the whole thing again. I'll come over here, go to the login page like this, put the email, right? So I can receive the email, then click on login, go back over here, check to see the new email that I'm going to receive. You see it's pretty fast, right? All the emails we received were pretty fast. Check to see if it was correctly authenticated. Come to our application. And if everything worked, you can see we have a session token on our cookies tab, right? If you want to check out the cookies tab, you go to applications on your Google Chrome. I would recommend using Google Chrome for this. And it should be on the cookies part of the storage system over here, right? And you can see that we have a very big string of just random letters and percentage signs. Basically, it looks like this because we are basically storing an object into a cookie. So it doesn't look like an object because it has to be converted into string. So this is basically what we're doing. We're storing the token right over here so that we can use it every time we make a request. Now, this is one of the most important parts of this whole process, right? Getting and keeping track of your token. But what is the point of that if we are not actually using in any of our API requests? So in order to make it useful, one thing we have to do is we need to create a simple testing API route inside of our API, which we're just going to call and test it out to see if it correctly checks to see if the user is authenticated. So I'm going to say app.post. And let's make a route which is going to be called /test, and we'll say rec res. And this whole thing, basically what it does is it will return back by saying res.json a message saying it worked, right? So it means this user is authenticated, right? It's just a message so we know that the user is authenticated. And basically how this whole process should work is when you make an API request, every time you make that request, you send the token, the session token, through your headers. If you don't know about what headers are, it's just a way so you can send data to your request from your front end to the backend. And in this case, we're going to send a token through there. Then on the backend over here, throughout every request that we make, there's going to be a middleware. And a middleware is just a function that runs before the request, and it determines if you should continue with the request or return back some sort of error message. Now, this is important for us because we're going to create a middleware right over here at the top called const auth middleware, something like this. And it will be just a function, like I mentioned, which will run before every API request, and it will check to see if the token sent through the headers matches with the one in Stytch. And if it does, then go ahead and continue with the API request. And in our case over here, it should just return back this message. But if it doesn't, it should prohibit this request from occurring, and it should return back an error message. So in order to make this middleware run before this request, we just have to paste the name of the function right over here before the rec and res arguments, right? So it will run this function first and then run whatever is over here. Now for the middleware, it takes in 3 different arguments. One is the rec, the res, and also next. Now you know what rec and res are. They will allow us to have access to stuff like the body of the request or the headers of the request, which is what we're going to be using it for. And the res, it's supposed to make you be able to end the request and send back some sort of response, right? Which is what we need when the user is not authenticated. Now, the next over here is a function that you call whenever you realize that the request is good, right? So in our case is whenever the user is authenticated, we'll call this function next like this, and it will basically tell the function to end and move on with the request. So it will only be called whenever our user is authenticated. So now that we know what all of those mean, what we want to do is we want to check to see if the user is authenticated or not. So we need to grab the token, the session token like this from the headers, right? Now the headers, you just access it almost like you were accessing anything from the body of the request. You just say rec.headers.session token like this. And the reason why we're not using capital T, this is important, is because all the variables in the header, they are lowercase. So don't pass the variable in the header with capital case. Just use lowercase like this and it should be fine. Now, if you're wondering why we're using headers instead of body, there's no real reason, at least in my view, like any big differences. It's just best practice in the industry. I know a lot of people might find different reasons why you should use one or the other. I just follow whatever is best practices, and it is best practice to send your tokens through the headers. So that's why we're using headers instead of body. But both of them allows you to send data from your front end to your back end. They just have different use cases for each of them. So we grab the token, right? And the way we actually check to see if the user is authenticated is by accessing the client, and the Stytch client, then saying sessions instead of magic links, which is what we were accessing before, and saying authenticate like this. Now we pass over here an object containing the session token like this, and the value will be the session token that we get back from our headers, right? Now the session token over here is not the whole object that we got over here, right? This whole object over here. It's not that. Inside of this object, if you take a look, this is the object, right? There's a value called session token, and this is what we need. So in our front end, when we send the headers value to our request, we need to access that specific value. Just letting you know so that when we get to that point, you understand why we're doing that, right? So after you authenticate and you see if it's right or wrong, then this is a promise, right? So we can use the async await method. So I can just make this asynchronous like this. Now this over here will return a promise. So we can either do the .then or the .catch method, or just use async await like we've been doing. For simplicity reasons, I'll use the .then .catch in this middleware, and I'll say .then over here after you authenticate the user. We want to know, like if it authenticates the user and there's no errors, then we want to call the next function, because it means that the user is authenticated and we want to move forward with the request. But if it doesn't authenticate the user and there's any errors like this over here, we can just send back the error and stop the request from happening by saying res.status. I can like there's a status codes that exist in every API, and the 401 code basically means user not authenticated or user not authorized. So that's why I'm using it on this one. It will basically give this error message when you return back the request. Then I'm going to say .json and return back the error that was caused, right? So basically what's happening over here is we are trying to authenticate the user with the session token. If the user is authenticated, we call the next function. If it's not, then we just return back the request. We end the request, send back a 401 error with the error message inside of the JSON that is sent back. Now, this means that this part of the test API route will only run if it first passes whatever we put inside of our middleware, right? Which is exactly what we wanted. Now, to test this, all we have to do is we have to make an API request to this endpoint, while at the same time passing the session token that we got back, which is in our cookies right now, as a part of the headers, right? So let's test that out on our homepage, right? We created this homepage specifically for that, right? It will only have a button right over here, like this, and the button will basically be used to call and make the API request. So I'll just say something like test API on the button, then I'll put an on click right over here, like this, and I'll call some sort of function called test API, like this. Then I'm gonna create this function test API, and the function, like I mentioned, all it's gonna do is it's going to make the Axios request. I'll import Axios like this. I'll make it capital case just to look like all the other ones that I wrote. And then I'm gonna say Axios.post, make a request to the http://localhost 3002/test, which is the endpoint we created. Then I'm gonna say if this request is done and we get back the token, then I want to grab the response, and for now let's just alert a message saying something like it worked, user is auth, something like user is authenticated, right? So if it moves fast, and then we can just alert a message with whatever we get back from the request, right? And whatever we're gonna get back, if it works and the user is authenticated, is this little message over here. So I'm just gonna say alert resp.data dot, no, not dot, it will just be a string, right? So it should appear over here. But if the user is not authenticated and there's any errors, we'll just catch this error over here, and we can just alert the error message, right? Error dot message, like this. Now, if there's any errors, I can just catch that error, and we can just alert a message saying something like user not authenticated, right? Just to differentiate. Now, the final thing we have to do to make this work is we have to pass the session token through the headers. And the way we do this is when you're making a post request, you know that the first thing on the function is the URL to the API. The second one is the body, which you have to pass. But the third one is the headers. And to pass the headers, you just pass an object right over here on the third one. You say headers like this. Then you pass an object as its value. And this object will contain all of the header variables that you want to pass. Now, the only header variable that I want to pass is a variable called session token, like this. Now, this is the variable that we're accessing over here on our middleware, right? So it has to be written like this with all lowercase, like I mentioned. Now, where do we get this session token? Well, we get it from the cookie. Now, to access the cookie, we've done that in our auth over here. We just import cookies from universal cookie. Then we just come over here. We say const cookie is equal to new cookies. And we just say over here that we want to set the session token equal to cookie.get, and we pass the session token property so that we can get the value in our cookie with the key of session token. Now, like I mentioned, this will return an object with a lot of properties. This one's over here, but we only want to access the session token property over here. So technically, we can just say dot session token, and this is what we're passing back to our backend, right? So we can test inside of our middleware. So now that we're passing this through our headers, let's test to see if the API works. So I'll try to log in again. I'll just come to this part of this tab open over here. I'll try to log in by sending the email again. Then we can test it out by receiving the email. Okay, so we got the email. Click on login. Now we should have in our cookies another token, a pretty new token that should last 30 minutes of authentication. And if we click on Test API over here, it should alert a message saying the user is authenticated. And as you can see, this is exactly what it says. We can test it how many times we want, and it will be authenticated for 30 minutes. Now, how do we check to see if this is right? Well, let's alter our cookie over here by just deleting it, and let's see if it works. So I'll click Test API, and you can see it says user not authenticated. And the reason why it wasn't authenticated is because it didn't pass over here on the check in our middleware because it wasn't authenticated by Stytch. Now, if you want to check to see if it actually returned a 401 error message, well, we can go to our network requests, and you can see that all of the requests worked but one. And the status code was 401 because this was the one that we didn't have the correct token, and it was caught by our middleware, and it ended the request so that we didn't get back whatever we sent back in the request. So this means it's working. Everything is working perfectly. I'm just going to add the CSS that I mentioned in the beginning of the video because I think it looks nice. Again, if you want to check out the code, it will all be in the description. And just go over everything again, just a final overview for those who still have some trouble in some parts of the video. I'll just go over it again so you guys can understand what we did. As you can see, I pasted the CSS over here. Like, you can take a look at it. It's barely anything. I'm not good with CSS, like I've said 1,000 times in my videos. I just like to do it because, I don't know, it kind of looks a little bit better when I do it. But yeah, if you want to check it out, go ahead, feel free. All the code will be in the description. But let's get an overview of what we did. So basically, we have this application over here. I deleted the token from the application over here. As you can see, we're not logged in right now, but if we want to log in, all we have to do is we go to the login route, and you can set this up however you want in your application. The main point of the video was just to show you how the functionality works. But basically, you put the email, the user who wants to log in. So I'll say PedroTech.co. I'll try to log in, and I should receive an email in order to log in, right? So a user would just get this email. They would click on this, and immediately what will happen is they can close the other tabs because now they're in a tab that is authenticated. Now, how do we know they are authenticated? Because over here we have on our application a session token variable inside of their cookie. Now, in order for us to get this variable over here, when we got redirected from this, we immediately went to a route, which is the auth route, which had a token over here at the top. We got that token and sent it to Stytch, to their service, which then they returned us back with our session token. We then stored our session token inside of our cookie, which is this what we have over here. And now every API request this user makes, we will be authenticating that user and verifying if the user making the request is the one that should be making the request. Now, how do we authenticate? Well, by sending this session token in the headers of every request and making it go through the little check that we made on our middleware, which authenticates with Stytch. Now we can test to see if it's working by clicking on this, and it will say it worked. The user is authenticated because behind the scenes, we just made an API request to our own API, which then connected to Stytch, checked to see if the user was authenticated. If it was, it would send this message. But if we made even the single change to this, I'll just make a small change to this. If I made a single change to I'll just delete everything. But if we change, if it's not the correct token, then what should happen is it shouldn't go through the request. The middleware should stop it, and we should get back the message saying user not authenticated, which means it's working. Now, this is basically it for the video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's been a very long time since I made some sort of authentication video, which I feel like I constantly get a better understanding how authentication works as a whole. I'm planning on making more advanced videos as well on authentication. This one was more of a beginner-based video because it uses a platform to facilitate most of the code for you. So it is very easy to write this with Stytch, right? And it works for a range of applications. You can use this even for large applications as well. And it's very simple. You can see it kind of decreased our development time by like a lot, because if we had to do all of this, the work of storing our users, of making the authentication, of creating the tokens and everything on our own, it would be a lot more lines of code and it will take a lot more time. So by using this library, we're able to do this in 40 minutes, 50 minutes, however long this video is. And it's pretty good, right? It's pretty fast. So thanks Stytch for supporting this video. It is a really good platform. Check out the link for it in the description, so that you can go and try this platform on your own as well. But yeah, that's basically it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe because I'm posting 2 to 3 times a week and I'll massively appreciate it. And yeah, that's basically it. Really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.